Mr. Bookman here. Before we go ahead and dive into today's audiobook, make sure you go ahead and subscribe to the channel. If you like today's story, make sure you do give us a thumbs up. But as you probably figured, I'm an avid reader, so I don't really get a chance to work out a lot, but I've actually found this new diet pill that guarantees you to lose 1 pound per day. If you want to check it out, simply just click or copy the link in the description. Now let's get right into the book.
The 1001 Humbugs, Part 1, from Household Words, Volume 11. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Charles Dickens' 200th Anniversary Collection, Volume 5. The 1001 Humbugs, Part 1, from Household Words, Volume 11, by Charles Dickens. Everybody is acquainted with that enchanting collection of stories, The 1001 Nights, better known in England as the Arabian Nights' Entertainments. Most people know that these wonderful fancies are unquestionably of genuine Eastern origin, and are to be found in Arabic manuscripts now existing in the Vatican, in Paris, in London, and in Oxford, the last named city being particularly distinguished in this connection as possessing in the library of Christ Church a manuscript of the never-to-be-forgotten Voyages of Sinbad the Sailor. The civilized world is indebted to France for a vast amount of its possessions, and among the rest for the first opening to Europe of this gorgeous storehouse of Eastern riches. So well did Monsieur Galland, the original translator, perform his task, that when Mr. Wortley Montagu brought home the manuscript now in the Bodleian Library, there was found, poetical quotations excepted, to be very little, and that of a very inferior kind, to add to what Monsieur Galland had already made perfectly familiar to France and England. Thus much as to the 1001 Nights we recall, by way of introduction to the discovery we are about to announce. There has lately fallen into our hands a manuscript in the Arabic character, with which we are perfectly acquainted, containing a variety of stories extremely similar in structure and incident to the 1001 Nights, but presenting the strange feature that although they are evidently of ancient origin, they have a curious accidental bearing on the present time. Allowing for the difference of manners and customs, it would often seem, were it not for the manifest impossibility of such prophetic knowledge in any mere man or men, that they were written expressly with an eye to events of the current age. We have referred the manuscript, which may be seen at our office on the first day of April in every year at precisely 4 o'clock in the morning, to the profoundest Oriental scholars of England and France, who are no less sensible than we are ourselves of this remarkable coincidence, and are equally at a loss to account for it. They are agreed, we may observe, on the propriety of our rendering the title in the words, The 1001 Humbugs, for although the Eastern story-tellers do not appear to have possessed any word or combination of parts of words precisely answering to the modern English humbug, which indeed they expressed by the figurative phrase, a camel made of sand, there is no doubt that they were conversant with so common a thing, and further that the thing was expressly meant to be designated in the general title of the Arabic manuscript now before us. Dispensing with further explanation, we at once commence the specimens we shall occasionally present of this literary curiosity. Introductory Chapter. Among the ancient kings of Persia, who extended their glorious conquests into the Indies, and far beyond the famous river Ganges, even to the limits of China, Taxitaurus, or fleeced bull, was incomparably the most renowned. He was so rich that he scorned to undertake the humblest enterprise, without inaugurating it by ordering his treasurers to throw several millions of pieces of gold into the dirt. For the same reason he attached no value to his foreign possessions, but merely used them as playthings for a little while, and then always threw them away or lost them. This wise Sultan, though blessed with innumerable sources of happiness, was afflicted with one fruitful cause of discontent. He had been married many scores of times, yet had never found a wife to suit him. Although he had raised to the dignity of Houser Commons, or peerless chatterer, a great variety of beautiful creatures, not only of the lineage of the high nobles of his court, but also selected from other classes of his subjects, the result had uniformly been the same. They proved unfaithful, brazen, talkative, idle, extravagant, inefficient, and boastful. Thus it naturally happened that the Houser Commons very rarely died a natural death, but was generally cut short in some violent manner. At length the young and lovely Reform, that is to say, Light of Reason, the youngest and fairest of all the Sultan's wives, and to whom he had looked with hope to recompense him for his many disappointments, made as bad a Houser Commons as any of the rest. The unfortunate Taxedtaurus took this so much to heart that he fell into a profound melancholy, secluded himself from observation, and for some time was so seldom seen or heard of that many of his great officers of state supposed him to be dead. Shall I never, said the unhappy monarch, beating his breast in his retirement in the pavilion of failure, and giving vent to his tears, find a Houser Commons who will be true to me? He then quoted from the poet certain verses importing, every Houser Commons has deceived me, every Houser Commons is a humbug. I must slay the present Houser Commons, as I have slain so many others. I am brought to shame and mortification. I am despised by the world, after which his grief so overpowered him that he fainted away. It happened that on recovering his senses, he heard the voice of the last made Houser Commons in the divan adjoining. Applying his ear to the lattice, and finding that that shameless princess was vaunting her loyalty and virtue, and denying a host of facts, which she always did all night, the Sultan drew his scimitar in a fury, resolved to put an end to her existence. But the Grand Vizier Parmarstoon, or twirling weathercock, who was at that moment watching his incensed master from behind the silken curtain of the pavilion of failure, hurried forward and prostrated himself, trembling, on the ground. This Vizier had newly succeeded to Aberdeen, or the Addled, who had, for his misdeeds, been strangled with a garter. The breath of the slave, said the Vizier, is in the hands of his lord, but the lion will sometimes deign to listen to the croaking of the frog. I swear to thee, Vizier, replied the Sultan, that I have borne too much already, and will bear no more. Thou and the Houser Commons are in one story, and by the might of Allah and the beard of the Prophet, I have a mind to destroy ye both. When the Vizier heard the Sultan thus menace him with destruction, his heart drooped within him. But, being a brisk and ready man, though stricken in years, he quoted certain lines from the poet, implying that the thunder cloud often spares the leaf, or there would be no fruit, and touched the ground with his forehead in token of submission. What wouldst thou say? Demanded the generous prince. I give thee leave to speak. Thou art not unaccustomed to public speaking. Speak glibly. Sire, returned the Vizier, but for the dread of the might of my lord, I would reply in the words addressed by the ignorant man to the genie. And what were those words? Demanded the Sultan. Repeat them. Parmarstoon replied, To hear is to obey. The story of the ignorant man and the genie. Sire, on the barbarous confines of the kingdom of the Tartars, there dwelt an ignorant man, who was obliged to make a journey through the great desert of desolation, which, as your Majesty knows, is sometimes a journey of upwards of 70 years. He bade adieu to his mother very early in the morning, and departed without a guide, ragged, barefoot, and alone. He found the way surprisingly steep and rugged, and beset by vile serpents and strange unintelligible creatures of horrible shapes. It was likewise full of black bogs and pits, into which he not only fell himself, but often had the misfortune to drag other travellers whom he encountered, and who got out no more, but were miserably stifled. Sire, on the 14th day of the journey of the ignorant man of the kingdom of the Tartars, he sat down to rest by the side of a foul well, being unable to find a better, and there cracked for a repast, as best he could, a very hard nut, which was all he had about him. He threw the shell anywhere as he stripped it off, and having made an end of his meal, arose to wander on again, when suddenly the air was darkened. He heard a frightful cry, and saw a monstrous genie of gigantic stature, who brandished a mighty scimitar in a hand of iron, advancing towards him. "Rise, ignorant beast," said the monster, as he drew nigh, "that I, Law, may kill thee for having affronted my ward." "Alas, my lord," returned the ignorant man, "how can I have affronted thy ward, whom I never saw?" "He is invisible to thee," returned the genie, "because thou art a benighted barbarian. But if thou hadst ever learnt any good thing, thou wouldst have seen him plainly, and wouldst have respected him." "Lord of my life," pleaded the traveller, "how could I learn where there were none to teach me? And how affront thy ward, whom I have not the power to see?" "I tell thee," returned the genie, "that with thy pernicious refuse thou hast struck my ward, Prince Usaiti, in the apple of his eye, and because thou hast done this, I will be thy ruin. I maim and kill the like of thee by thousands every year, for no other crime. And shall I spare thee? Kneel and receive the blow." "Your Majesty will believe," continued the Grand Vizier, "that the ignorant man of the kingdom of the Tartars gave himself up for lost when he heard those cruel words, without so much as repeating the formula of our faith. There is but one Allah, from him we come, to him we must return, and who shall resist his will? For he was too ignorant even to have heard it. He bent his neck to receive the fatal stroke. His head rolled off as he finished saying these words. Dread Law, if thou hadst taken half the pains to teach me to discern thy ward, that thou hast taken to avenge him, thou hadst been spared the great account to which I summon thee." Taxedtaurus, the Sultan of Persia, listened attentively to this recital on the part of his Grand Vizier, and when it was concluded, said, with a threatening brow, "Expound to me, O nephew of a dog, the points of resemblance between the tiger and the nightingale, and what thy ignorant man of the accursed kingdom of the Tartars has to do with the false Hausa Commands and the glib Vizier Parmarstoon." While speaking, he again raised his glittering scimitar. "Let not my master sully the sole of his foot by crushing an insect," returned the Vizier, kissing the ground 7 times. "I meant but to offer up a petition from the dust, that the light of the eyes of the faithful would, before striking, deign to hear my daughter." "What of thy daughter?" said the Sultan impatiently. "And why should I hear thy daughter any more than the daughter of the dirtiest of dustmen?" "Sire," returned the Vizier, "I am dirtier than the dirtiest of the dustmen in your Majesty's sight, but my daughter is deeply read in the history of every Hausa Commands who has aspired to your Majesty's favour during many years, and if your Majesty would condescend to hear some of the legends she has to relate, they might—" "What dost thou call thy daughter?" demanded the Sultan, interrupting. "Hansard Dade," replied the Vizier. "Go," said the Sultan, bring her hither. I spare thy life until thou shalt return. The Grand Vizier Parmarstoon, on receiving the injunction to bring his daughter Hansardadade into the royal presence, lost no time in repairing to his palace, which was but across the Sultan's gardens, and going straight to the women's apartments, found Hansardadade surrounded by a number of old women, who were all consulting her at once. In truth, this affable princess was perpetually being referred to by all manner of old women. Hastily causing her attendants, when she heard her father's errand, to attire her in her finest dress, which outsparkled the sun, and bidding her young sister, Brothartoon, or chamber candlestick, to make similar preparations, and accompany her, the daughter of the Grand Vizier soon covered herself with a rich veil, and said to her father, with a low obeisance, Sir, I am ready to attend you to my lord the Commander of the Faithful. The Grand Vizier and his daughter Hansardadade, and her young sister Brothartoon, preceded by Mr. Speaker, a black mute, the chief of the officers of the royal seraglio, went across the Sultan's gardens by the way the Vizier had come, and arriving at the Sultan's palace, found that monarch on his throne surrounded by his principal councillors and officers of state. They all four prostrated themselves at a distance, and waited the Sultan's pleasure. That gracious prince was troubled in his mind when he commanded the fair Hansardadade, who, on the whole, was very fair indeed, to approach, for he had sworn an oath in the Vizier's absence, from which he could not depart. Nevertheless, as it must be kept, he proceeded to announce it before the assembly. Vizier, said he, thou hast brought thy daughter here as possessing a large stock of Hausa Kumaan's experience, in the hope of her relating something that may soften me under my accumulated wrongs. Know that I have solemnly sworn that if her stories fail, as I believe they will, to mitigate my wrath, I will have her burned, and her ashes cast to the winds. Also I will strangle thee and the present Hausa Kumaans, and will take a new one every day, and strangle her as soon as taken, until I find a good and true one. Parmarstoon replied, To hear is to obey. Hansardadade then took a one-stringed lute, and sang a lengthened song in prose. Its purport was, I am the recorder of brilliant eloquence. I am the chronicler of patriotism. I am the pride of sages, and the joy of nations. The continued salvation of the country is owing to what I preserve, and without it there would be no business done. Sweet are the voices of the crow and chough, and Persia never, never, never can have words enough. At the conclusion of this delightful strain, the Sultan and the whole divan were so faint with rapture that they remained in a comatose state for several hours. Would your Majesty, said Hansardadade, when all were at length recovered, prefer first to hear the story of the wonderful camp, or the story of the talkative barber, or the story of Sirli Tapa and the 40 thieves? I would have thee commence, replied the Sultan, with the story of the 40 thieves. Hansardadade began, Sire, there was once a poor relation, when Brothartoon interposed. Dear sister, cried Brothartoon, it is now past midnight. It will be shortly daybreak, and if you are not asleep, you ought to be. I pray you, dear sister, by all means to hold your tongue to-night, and if my lord the Sultan will suffer you to live another day, you can talk to-morrow. The Sultan arose with a clouded face, but went out without giving any orders for the execution. End of the 1001 Humbugs, Part 1, from Household Words, Volume 11. Recording by Noel Badrian, County Offaly, Ireland. The 1001 Humbugs, Part 2, from Household Words, Volume 11, This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Charles Dickens, 200th Anniversary Collection, Volume 5. The 1001 Humbugs, Part 2, from Household Words, Volume 11, by Charles Dickens. The Story of Scarli Tapa and the 40 Thieves. Accompanied by the Grand Vizier, Parmarstoon, and the black mute Mr. Speaker, the chief of the Seraglio, Hansardadade again repaired next day to the august presence, and after making the usual prostrations before the Sultan, began thus. Sire, there was once a poor relation who lived in a town in the dominions of the Sultan of the Indies, and whose name was Scarli Tapa. He was the youngest son of a dowager, which, as your Majesty knows, is a female spirit of voracious appetites, and generally with a wig and a carmine complexion, who prowls about old houses and preys upon mankind. This dowager had attained an immense age, in consequence of having been put by an evil genie on the pension list, or talisman to secure long life. But at length she very reluctantly died towards the close of a quarter, after making the most affecting struggle to live into the half-year. Scarli Tapa had a rich elder brother named Cashim, who had married the daughter of a prosperous merchant, and lived magnificently. Scarli Tapa, on the other hand, could barely support his wife and family by lounging about the town, and going out to dinner with his utmost power of perseverance, betting on horse-races, playing at billiards, and running into debt with everybody who would trust him, the last being his principal means of obtaining an honest livelihood. One day, when Scarli Tapa had strolled for some time along the banks of a great river of liquid filth, which ornamented that agreeable country and rendered it salubrious, he found himself in the neighbourhood of the woods and forests. Lifting up his eyes, he observed in the distance a great cloud of dust. He was not surprised to see it, knowing those parts to be famous for casting prodigious quantities of dust into the eyes of the faithful. But as it rapidly advanced towards him, he climbed into a tree, the better to observe it without being seen himself. As the cloud of dust approached, Scarli Tapa perceived it from his hiding-place to be occasioned by 40 mounted robbers, each bestriding a severely goaded and heavily laden bull. The whole troop came to a halt at the foot of the tree, and all the robbers dismounted. Every robber then tethered his hack to the most convenient shrub, gave it a full meal of very bad chaff, and hung over his arm the empty sack which had contained the same. Then the captain of the robbers, advancing to a door in an antediluvian rock, which Scarli Tapa had not observed before, and on which were the enchanted letters OFFICE, said, "Debrett's Peerage, open sesame." As soon as the captain of the robbers had uttered these words, the door, obedient to the charm, flew open, and all the robbers went in. The captain went in last, and the door shut of itself. The robbers stayed so long within the rock that Scarli Tapa more than once felt tempted to descend the tree and make off. Fearful, however, that they might reappear and catch him before he could escape, he remained hidden by the leaves as patiently as he could. At last the door opened, and the 40 robbers came out. As the captain had gone in last, he came out first, and stood to see the whole troop pass him. When they had all done so, he said, "Debrett's Peerage, shut sesame." The door immediately closed again as before. Every robber then mounted his bull, adjusting before him his sack well filled with gold, silver, and jewels. When the captain saw that they were all ready, he put himself at their head, and they rode off by the way they had come. Scarli Tapa remained in the tree until the receding cloud of dust occasioned by the troop of robbers, with their captain at their head, was no longer visible, and then came softly down and approached the door. Making use of the words that he had heard pronounced by the captain of the robbers, he said, after first piously strengthening himself with the remembrance of his deceased mother, the dowager, Debrett's peerage, open sesame. The door instantly flew wide open. Scarli Tapa, who had expected to see a dull place, was surprised to find himself in an exceedingly agreeable vista of rooms, where everything was as light as possible, and where vast quantities of the finest wheaten loaves, and the richest gold and silver fishes, and all kinds of valuable possessions were to be got for the laying hold of. Quickly loading himself with as much spoil as he could move under, he opened and closed the door as the captain of the robbers had done, and hurried away with his treasure to his poor home. When the wife of Scarli Tapa saw her husband enter their dwelling after it was dark, and proceed to pile upon the floor a heap of wealth, she cried, "Alas, husband, whom have you taken in now?" "Be not alarmed, wife," returned Scarli Tapa, "no one suffers but the public," and then told her how he, a poor relation, had made his way into office by the magic words, and had enriched himself. There being more money and more loaves and fishes than they knew what to do with at the moment, the wife of Scarli Tapa, transported with joy, ran off to her sister-in-law, the wife of Cashim Tapa, who lived hard by, to borrow a measure by means of which their property could be got into some order. The wife of Cashim Tapa, looking into the measure when it was brought back, found at the bottom of it several of the crumbs of fine loaves, and of the scales of gold and silver fishes, upon which, flying into an envious rage, she thus addressed her husband: "Wretched Cashim, you know you are of high birth as the eldest son of a dowager, and you think you are rich, but your despised younger brother, Scarli Tapa, is infinitely richer, and more powerful than you. Judge of his wealth from these tokens." At the same time she showed him the measure. Cashim, who since his marriage to the merchant's widow has treated his brother coolly, and held him at a distance, was at once fired with a burning desire to know how he had become rich. He was unable to sleep all night, and at the first streak of day, before the summons to morning prayers was heard from the minarets of the mosques, arose and went to his brother's house. "Dear Scarli Tapa," said he, pretending to be very fraternal, "what loaves and fishes are these that thou hast in thy possession?" Scarli Tapa, perceiving from this discourse that he could no longer keep his secret, communicated his discovery to his brother, who lost no time in providing all things necessary for the stowage of riches, and in repairing alone to the mysterious door near the woods and forests. When night came, and Cashim Tapa did not return, his relatives became uneasy. His absence being prolonged for several days and nights, Scarli Tapa at length proceeded to the enchanted door in search of him. Opening it by the infallible means, what were his emotions to find that the robbers had encountered his brother within, and had quartered him upon the spot for ever. Commander of the Faithful, when Scarli Tapa beheld the dismal spectacle of his brother everlastingly quartered upon office, for having merely uttered the magic words, Debrett's peerage, open sesame, he was greatly troubled in his mind. Feeling the necessity of hushing the matter up, and putting the best face upon it for the family credit, he at once devised a plan to attain that object. There was, in the house where his brother had sat himself down on his marriage with the merchant's daughter, a discreet slave, whose name was Jobbiana. Though a kind of under-secretary in the Treasury Department, she was very useful in the dirty work of the establishment, and had also some knowledge of the stables, and could assist the whippers-in at a pinch. Scarli Tapa, going home and taking the discreet slave aside, related to her how her master was quartered, and how it was now their business to disguise the fact, and deceive the neighbours. Jobbiana replied, To hear is to obey. Accordingly, before day, for she always avoided daylight, the discreet slave went to a certain cobbler whom she knew, and found him sitting in his stall in the public street. Good morrow, friend, said she, putting a bribe into his hand. Will you bring the tools of your trade and come to a house with me? Willingly, but what to do? Replied the cobbler, who was a merry fellow. Nothing against my patriotism and conscience, I hope? At which he laughed heartily. Not in the least, returned Jobbiana, giving him another bribe. But you must go into the house blindfold, and with your hands tied. You don't mind that for a job? I don't mind anything for a job, returned the cobbler with vivacity. I like a job. It's my business to job. Only make it worth my while, and I am ready for any job you may please to name. At the same time he arose briskly. Jobbiana then imparted to him the quartering that had taken place, and that he was wanted to cobble the subject up and hide what had been done. Is that all? If it is no more than that, returned the cobbler, blind my eyes and tie my hands, and let us cobble away as long as you like. Sire, the discreet slave blindfolded the cobbler and tied his hands, and took him to the house, where he cobbled the subject up with so much skill that she rewarded him munificently. We must now return to the captain of the robbers, whose name was Yawyawah, and whose soul was filled with perplexities and anxieties, when he visited the cave and found, from the state of the wheaten loaves and the gold and silver fishes, that there was yet another person who possessed the secret of the magic door. Your Majesty must know that Yawyawah, captain of the robbers, most of whose forefathers had been rebellious genii who never had anything whatsoever to do with Solomon, sauntering through the city in a highly disconsolate and languid state, chanced to come before daylight upon the cobbler working in his stall. Good morrow, honourable friend, said he, you job early. My lord, returned the cobbler, I job early and late. You do well, observed the captain of the robbers. But have you light enough? The less light the better, said the cobbler, for my work. Ay, returned Yawyawah. Why so? Why so, repeated the cobbler, winking, because I can cobble certain businesses best in the dark. When the captain of the robbers heard him say this, he quickly understood the hint. He blindfolded him and tied his hands, as the discreet slave had done, turned his coat, and led him away until he stopped at the house. This is the house that was concerned in the quartering and cobbling, said he. The captain set a mark upon it. But Jobbiana, coming by soon afterward, and seeing what had been done, set exactly the same mark upon 20 other houses in the same row, so that in truth they were all precisely alike, and one was marked by Jobbiana exactly as the other was, and there was not a pin to choose between them. Thus discomfited, the captain of the robbers called his troop together, and addressed them. My noble, right honourable, honourable and gallant, honourable and learned, and simply honourable friends, said he, it is apparent that we, the old band who for so many years have possessed the command of the magic door, are in danger of being superseded. In a word, it is clear that there are now 2 bands of robbers, and that we must overcome the opposition, or be ourselves vanquished. All the robbers applauded this sentiment. Therefore, said the captain, I will disguise myself as a trader, in the patriotic line of business, and will endeavour to prevail by stratagem. The robbers, as with one voice, approved of this design. The captain of the robbers accordingly disguised himself as a trader, of that sort which is called at the bazaars a patriot, and having again had recourse to the cobbler, and having carefully observed the house, arranged his plans without delay. Feigning to be a dealer in soft soap, he concealed his men in 39 jars of that commodity, a man in every jar, and loading a number of mules with his pretended merchandise, appeared at the head of his caravan one evening at the house where Scarli Tapa was sitting on a bench in his usual place, taking it, as he generally did in the house, very coolly. My lord, said the pretended trader, I am a stranger here, and know not where to bestow my merchandise for the night. Suffer me then, I beseech you, to warehouse it here. Scarli Tapa rose up, showed the pretended merchant where to put his goods, and instructed Jobbiana to prepare an entertainment for his guest, also a bath for himself, his hands being very far from clean. The discreet slave, in obedience to her orders, proceeded to prepare the entertainment and the bath, but was vexed to discover, when it was late, and the shops of the dealers were all shut, that there was no soft soap in the house, which was the more unexpected, as there was generally more than enough. Remembering, however, that the pretended trader had brought a large stock with him, she went to one of the jars to get a little. As she drew near to it, the impatient robber within, supposing it to be his leader, said in a low voice, Is it time for our party to come in? Jobbiana, instantly comprehending the danger, replied, Not yet, but presently. She went in this manner to all the jars, receiving the same question and giving the same answer. The discreet slave, returning into the kitchen, with her presence of mind not at all disturbed, and there prepared a lukewarm mess of soothing syrup, worn-out wigs, weak milk and water, poppy heads, empty nutshells, froth, and other similar ingredients. When it was sufficiently mawkish, she returned to the jars, bearing a large kettle filled with this mixture, poured some of it upon every robber, and threw the whole troop into a state of insensibility or submission. She then returned to the house, served up the entertainment, cleared away the fragments, and attired herself in a rich dress to dance before her master and his disguised visitor. In the course of her dances, which were performed in the slowest time, and during which she blew both her own and the family trumpet with extraordinary pertinacity, Jobbiana took care always to approach nearer and still nearer to the captain of the robbers. At length she seized him by the sleeve of his disguise, disclosed him in his own dress to her master, and related where his men were, and how they had asked, Was it time to come in? Scarli Tapa, so far from being angry with the pretended trader, fell upon his neck and addressed him in these friendly expressions. Since our object is the same, and no great difference exists between us, O my brother, let us form a coalition. Debrett's peerage will open sesame to the Scarli Tapas and the Yahwehs equally, and will shut out the rest of mankind. Let it be so. There is plunder enough in the cave, so that it is never restored to the original owners, and never gets into other hands but ours. But why should we quarrel over much? The captain made a suitable reply, and embraced his entertainer. Jobbiana, shedding tears of joy, embraced them both. Shortly afterwards, Scarli Tapa, in gratitude to the wise Jobbiana, caused her to be invested with the freedom of the city, where she had been very much beloved for many years, and gave her in marriage to his own son. They had a large family, and a powerful number of relations, who all inherited, by right of relationship, the power of opening sesame, and shutting it tight. The Yahwehs became a very numerous tribe also, and exercised the same privilege. This, Commander of the Faithful, is the reason why, in that distant part of the dominions of the Sultan of the Indies, all true believers kiss the ground 777 times on hearing the magic words, Debrett's peerage, why the talisman of office is always possessed in common by the three great races of the Scarli Tapas, the Yahwehs, and the Jobbianas, why the public affairs, great and small, and all the national enterprises, both by land and sea, are conducted on a system which is the highest peak of the mountain of justice, and which always succeeds, why the people of that country are serenely satisfied with themselves, and things in general are unquestionably the envy of surrounding nations, and cannot fail in the inevitable order of events to flourish to the end of the world, why all these great truths are incontrovertible, and why all who dispute them receive the bastinado as atheists and rebels. Here Hansardadade concluded the story of the 40 Thieves, and said, If my lord the Sultan will deign to hear another narrative from the lips of the lowest of his servants, I have adventures yet more surprising than these to relate, adventures that are worthy to be written in letters of gold. By Allah, exclaimed the Sultan, whose hand had been upon his scimitar several times during the previous recital, and whose eyes had menaced Parmarstoon until the soul of that Vizier had turned to water, what thou hast told but now deserves to be recorded in letters of brass. Hansardadade was proceeding. Sire, in the great plain at the feet of the mountains of Casgar, which is 7 weeks' journey across, when Brothartoon interrupted her, Sister, it is nearly daybreak, and if you are not asleep, you ought to be. I pray you, dear sister, tell us at present no more of these stories that you know so well, but hold your tongue, and go to bed. Hansardadade was silent, and the Sultan arose in a very indifferent humour, and gloomily walked out in great doubt whether he would let her live, on any consideration, over another day. End of the 1001 Humbugs, Part 2, from Household Words, Volume 11. Recording by Noel Badrian, County Offaly, Ireland. The 1001 Humbugs, Part 3, from Household Words, Volume 11. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Charles Dickens, 200th Anniversary Collection, Volume 5. The 1001 Humbugs, Part 3, from Household Words, Volume 11, by Charles Dickens. On the following night, Hansardadade proceeded with the story of the talkative barber. In the great plain which lies at the feet of the mountains of Casgar, and which is 7 weeks' journey across, there is a city where a lame young man was once invited, with other guests, to an entertainment. Upon his entrance, the company already assembled rose up to do him honour, and the host, taking him by the hand, invited him to sit down with the rest upon the estrade. At the same time, the master of the house greeted his visitor with the salutation, Allah is Allah, there is no Allah but Allah, may his name be praised, and may Allah be with you. Sire, the lame young man, who had the appearance of one that had suffered much, was about to comply with the invitation of the master of the house to seat himself upon the estrade with the rest of the company, when he suddenly perceived among them a barber. He instantly flew back with every token of abhorrence, and made towards the door. The master of the house, amazed at this behaviour, stopped him. Sir, exclaimed the young man, I adjure you by Mecca, do not stop me, let me go. I cannot without horror look upon that abominable barber. Upon him, and upon the whole of his relations, be the curse of Allah, in return for all I have endured from his intolerable levity, and from his talk never being to the point or purpose. With these words, the lame young man again made violently towards the door. The guests were astonished at this behaviour, and began to have a very bad opinion of the barber. The master of the house so courteously entreated the lame young man to recount to the company the causes of this strong dislike, that at length he could not refuse. Averting his head so that he might not see the barber, he proceeded. Gentlemen, you must know that this accursed barber is the cause of my being crippled, and is the occasion of all my misfortunes. I became acquainted with him in the following manner. I am called Publique, or the many-headed. I am one of a large family, who have undergone an infinite variety of adventures and afflictions. One day I chanced to sit down to rest on a seat in a narrow lane, when a lattice over against me opened, and I obtained a glimpse of the most ravishing beauty in the world. After watering a pot of budding flowers which stood in the window, she perceived me, and modestly withdrew, but not before she had directed towards me a glance so full of charms, that I screamed aloud with love, and became insensible for a considerable time. When I came to myself, I directed a favourite slave to make inquiries among the neighbours, and, on pain of death, to bring me an exact account of the young lady's family and condition. The slave acquitted himself so well that he informed me within an hour that the young lady's name was Fair Government, and that she was the daughter of the chief Cadi. The violence of my passion became so great that I took to my bed that evening, fell into a fever, and was reduced to the brink of death, when an old lady of my acquaintance came to see me. Son, said she, after observing me attentively, I perceive that your disease is love. Inform me who is the object of your affections, and rely upon me to bring you together. This address of the good old lady's had such an effect on me, that I immediately rose, quite restored in health, and began to dress myself. In a word, continued the lame young man, addressing the company assembled in the house of the citizen of the plain, at the feet of the mountains of Cascar, and always keeping his head in such a position as that he could not see the barber. The old lady exerted herself in my behalf with such effect, that on the very next day she returned, commissioned by the enchantress of my soul to appoint a meeting between us. I arranged to attire myself in my richest clothes, and dispatched the same favourite slave with instructions to fetch a barber, who knew his business, and who could skilfully prepare me for the interview I was to have, for the first time in my life, with Fair Government. Gentlemen, the slave returned with the wretch whom you see here. Sir, began this accursed barber, whom a malignant destiny thus inflicted on me, how do you do? I hope you are pretty well. I do not wish to praise myself, but you are lucky to have sent for me. My name is Prémiat. In me you behold an accomplished diplomatist, a first-rate statesman, a frisky speaker, an easy shaver, a touch-and-go joker, a giver of the go-by to all complainers, and above all, a member of the aristocracy of barbers. Sir, I am a lineal descendant of the Prophet, and consequently a born barber. All my relations, friends, acquaintances, connections, and associates are likewise lineal descendants of the Prophet, and consequently born barbers every one. As I said but the other day to Layardine, or the troublesome, the aristocracy— May Allah confound thy aristocracy and thee, cried I. Will you begin to shave me? Gentlemen, proceeded the lame young man, the barber had brought a showy case with him, and he consumed such an immense time in pretending to open it, that I was well nigh fretted to death. I will not be shaved at all, said I. Sir, returned the unabashed barber, you sent for me to shave you, and with your pardon I will do it, whether you like it or not. Ah, sir, you have not so good an opinion of me as your father had. I knew your father, and he appreciated me. I said 1,000 pleasant things to him, and rendered him 1,000 services, and he adored me. Just heaven, he would exclaim, you are an inexhaustible fountain of wisdom. No man can plumb the depths of your profundity. My dear sir, I would reply, you do me more honour than I deserve. Still, as a lineal descendant of the Prophet, and one of the aristocracy of born barbers, I will, with the help of Allah, shave you pretty close before I have done with you. You may guess, gentlemen, in my state of expectancy, with my heart set on fair government, and the precious time running by, how I cursed this impertinent chattering on the part of the barber. Barber of mischief, barber of sin, barber of false pretence, barber of froth and bubble, said I, stamping my foot upon the ground, will you begin to do your work? Fair and softly, sir, said he, let me count you out first. With that he counted from 1 to 38 with great deliberation, and then laughed heartily, and went out to look at the weather. When the barber returned, he went on prattling as before. You're in high feather, sir, said he. I am glad to see you look so well. But how can you be otherwise than flourishing, after having sent for me? I am called the Careless. I am not like Dizzy, who draws blood, nor like Darby, who claps on blisters, nor like Johnny, who works with the square and rule. I am the easy shaver, and I care for nobody. I can do anything. Shall I dance the dance of Mr. Pitt, to please you, or shall I sing the song of Mr. Folks, or joke the joke of Joe Miller? Honour me with your attention while I do all three. The barber, continued the lame young man with a groan, danced the dance of Mr. Pitt, and sang the song of Mr. Folks, and joked the joke of Joe Miller, and then began with fresh impertinences. Sir, said he, with a lofty flourish, when Britain first at heaven's command rose from out of the azure main, this was the charter of the land, and guardian angels sang this strain, singing, as first lord was a Waller king the office guarding around, no end of born barbers he picked up and found. Says he, I will load them with silver and gold, for the country's a donkey, and as such is sold. At this point I could bear his insolence no longer, but starting up cried, Barber of hollowness, by what consideration am I restrained from falling upon and strangling thee? Calmly, sir, said he, let me count you out first. He then played his former game of counting from 1 to under 40, and again laughed heartily, and went out to take the height of the sun, and make a calculation of the state of the wind, that he might know whether it was an auspicious time to begin to shave me. I took the opportunity, said the young man, of flying from my house so darkened by the fatal presence of this detestable barber, and of repairing with my utmost speed to the house of the Cadi. But the appointed hour was long past, and fair government had withdrawn no one knew whither. As I stood in the street cursing my evil destiny, and execrating this intolerable barber, I heard a hue and cry. Looking in the direction whence it came, I saw the diabolical barber, attended by an immense troop of his relations and friends, the lineal descendants of the Prophet, and aristocracy of born barbers, all offering a reward to any one who would stop me, and all proclaiming the unhappy public to be their natural prey and rightful property. I turned and fled. They jostled and bruised me cruelly among them, and I became maimed, as you see. I utterly detest, abominate, and abjure this barber, and ever since and evermore I totally renounce him. With these concluding words, the lame young man arose in a sullen way that had something very threatening in it, and left the company. Commander of the Faithful, when the lame young man was gone, the guests, turning to the barber, who wore his turban very much on one side, and smiled complacently, asked him what he had to say for himself. The barber immediately danced the dance of Mr. Pitt, and sang the song of Mr. Folks, and joked the joke of Joe Miller. Gentlemen, said he, not at all out of breath after these performances, it is true that I am called the Careless. Permit me to recount to you, as a lively diversion, what happened to a twin brother of that young man who has so undeservedly abused me, in connection with a near relation of mine. No one objecting, the barber related the story of the Barmecide feast. The young man's twin brother, Guld Publique, was in very poor circumstances, and hardly knew how to live. In his reduced condition, he was fain to go about to great men, begging them to take him in, and to do them justice, they did it extensively. One day, in the course of his poverty-stricken wanderings, he came to a large house with 2 high towers, a spacious hall, an abundance of fine gilding, statuary, and painting. Although the house was far from finished, he could see enough to assure him that enormous sums of money must be lavished upon it. He inquired who was the master of this wealthy mansion, and received for information that he was a certain Barmecide. The Barmecide, gentlemen, is my near relation, and like myself a lineal descendant of the Prophet, and a born barber. The young man's twin brother passed through the gateway, and crept submissively onward, until he came into a spacious apartment, where he descried the Barmecide sitting at the upper end in the post of honour. The Barmecide asked the young man's brother what he wanted. My lord, replied he, in a pitiful tone, I am sore distressed, and have none but high and mighty nobles like yourself to help me. That much at least is true, returned the Barmecide. There is no help save in high and mighty nobles. It is the appointment of Allah. But what is your distress? My lord, said the young man's brother, I am fasting from all the nourishment I want, and, whatever you may please to think, am in a dangerous extremity. A very little more at any moment, and you would be astonished at the figure I should make. Is it so indeed? inquired the Barmecide. Sir, returned the young man's brother, I swear by heaven and earth that it is so, and heaven and earth are every hour drawing nearer to the discovery that it is so. Alas, poor man, replied the Barmecide, pretending to have an interest in him. Ho, boy! Bring us of the best here, and let us not spare our liberal measures. This poor man shall make good cheer without delay. Though no boy appeared, gentlemen, and though there was no sign of the liberal measures of which the Barmecide spoke so ostentatiously, the young man's brother, Guld Publique, endeavoured to fall in with the Barmecide's humour. Come, cried the Barmecide, feigning to pour water on his hands, let us begin fair and fresh. How do you like this purity? Ah, my lord, returned Guld Publique, imitating the Barmecide's action, this is indeed purity, this is in truth a delicious beginning. Then let us proceed, said the Barmecide, seeming to dry his hands with this smoking dish of reform. How do you like it? Fat? At the same time he pretended to hand choice morsels to the young man's brother. Take your fill of it, exclaimed the Barmecide. There is plenty here, do not spare it, it was cooked for you. May Allah prolong your life, my lord, said Guld Publique. You are liberal indeed. The Barmecide, having boasted in this pleasant way of his smoking dish of reform, which had no existence, affected to call for another dish. Ho! cried he, clapping his hands, bring in those educational kabobs. Then he imitated the action of putting some upon the plate of the young man's brother, and went on. How do you like these educational kabobs? The cook who made them is a treasure. Are they not justly seasoned? Are they not so honestly made as to be adapted to all digestions? You want them very much, I know, and have wanted them this long time. Do you enjoy them? And here is a delicious mess called Forine Legion. Eat of it also, for I pride myself upon it, and expect it to bring me great respect and much friendship from distant lands. And this pilau of church endowments and duties, which you see so beautifully divided, pray how do you approve of this pilau? It was invented on your account, and no expense has been spared to render it to your taste. Ho, boy! Bring in that ragout. Now here, my friend, is a ragout called Law of Partnership. It is expressly made for poor men's eating, and I particularly pride myself upon it. This is indeed a dish at which you may cut and come again. And, boy, hasten to set before my good friend Guld Publique the rare stew of colonial spices, minced crime, hashed poverty, swollen liver of ignorance, stale confusion, rotten tape, and chopped up bombast, steeped in official sauce, and garnished with a great deal of tongue and a very little brains, the crowning dish of which my dear friend never can have enough, and upon which he thrives so well. But you don't eat with an appetite, my brother, said the Barmecide. I fear the repast is hardly to your liking. Pardon me, my benefactor, returned the guest, whose jaws ached with pretending to eat. I am full almost to the throat. Well then, said the Barmecide, since you have dined so well, try the dessert. Here are apples of discord from the Horse Guards and Admiralty. Here is abundance of the famous fruit from the Dead Sea that turns to ashes on the lips. Here are the dates from the Peninsula in great profusion. And here is a fig for the nation. Eat and be happy. My lord, replied the object of his merriment, I am quite worn out by your liberality, and can bear no more. Gentlemen, continued the loquacious barber, when the humorous Barmecide, my near relation, lineally descended from the Prophet, had brought his guest to this pass, he clapped his hands 3 times to summon around him his slaves, and instructed them to force in reality the vile stew of which he had spoken down the throat of the hungry Guld Publique, together with a nauseous mess called double income tax, and to put bitters in his drink, strew dust on his head, blacken his face, shave his eyebrows, pluck away his beard, insult him, and make merry with him. He then caused him to be attired in a shameful dress, and set upon an ass with his face to the tail, and in this state be publicly exposed with the inscription around his neck, This is the punishment of Guld Publique, who asked for nourishment, and said he wanted it. Such is the present droll condition of this person, while my near relation the Barmecide sits in the post of honour, with his turban very much on one side, enjoying the joke, which I think you will all admit is an excellent one. Hansardadade, having made an end of the discourse of the loquacious barber, would have instantly begun another story, had not Brother Toon shut her up with, Dear sister, it will be shortly daybreak. Get to bed, and be quiet. End of The 1001 Humbugs, Part 3, from Household Words, Volume 11. Recording by Noel Badrian, County Offaly, Ireland.
MrBookman here. I hope you enjoyed today's audiobook. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, but more importantly, if you're looking to lose 1 pound per day, guaranteed, make sure you check out the description, click or copy that link, and of course, we'll see you next time, and remember, you are appreciated.